Sweet Home is now on Netflix. So here is my review. I know, it's stupid. A mysterious illness breaks out, causing people to turn into hideous creatures. Residents out of an apartment complex must work together and learn to survive. I've been looking forward to this Netflix original series for several weeks now. The trailer was really intriguing, and I love most of the stuff that comes from South Korea. Right off the bat, though, I've got to say that the series is inconsistent. The special effects sometimes are really good, and other times they're absolutely terrible. The tension and urgency because of the story concept should be nonstop, but it vacillates a ton, and it almost forgets that there's impending doom. We get introduced to a lot of characters in the first 2 episodes, and most of them in that first episode. Now, we don't get all of their background just crammed into that first episode or even the first 2. It does build over time. And so it makes these characters more robust as the episodes progress. One thing I love about many of the South Korean shows and movies that I've seen is how well they're able to blend genres. I mean, they take a thriller or a horror and make it wildly emotional. They're able to take these characters and make me invested so much into them so that when something is on the line, I'm right there. Like, I'm just on bated breath to make sure that their outcome is gonna be positive. Now, this had some of those qualities, but it did take me a while to become invested in a lot of the players. In the very first episode, I was wondering if I had made a mistake in watching because the graphics and the effects are absolutely abysmal. We are shown some creatures and they're cool and they have some really great qualities to them and how just the imagination that went into building these characters. But then they're destroyed by terrible looking CGI. I mean, it's almost like it's a cutscene from a video game. The texture, the lighting, all of that doesn't match the rest of the film. And so it breaks you out of anything that you've been invested in. And that fakeness, that non-matching of texture, of lighting, it doesn't feel seamless within the scenes. That continues through a lot of the show. And it does break me out almost every time because I get distracted by the quality of these graphics. But then there's other times where they're using practical effects, and not only for creatures, but for also the blood and the gore. There's a symptom of the infection that causes blood. I mean, a lot of blood. And it is disgusting and it is effective. But the practical effects that they used in this area, as well as some of the creatures that they build, and they actually build them out, it works really well. I just wish they would have spent more time on the CGI so that you wouldn't have been broken out of the feeling or just out of the narrative when you see these pop onto the screen. Now, I get it, some of them, because some of the creatures and what they have to do, it would be really hard to do it with practical effects. But I just wish that they would have made them seamless. I wish they would have just blended it better so that it matched the awesomeness in the other parts of the series. A lot of the atmosphere works well too, because this takes place in an apartment building. And so you have a closed off location, and that causes claustrophobia, but also a false sense of safety. They use some really vivid colors a lot of the time, and then other times they enhance it really, I guess, with CGI. And again, that's not done very well. But the location itself, the atmosphere that is built, because you have just this apartment building, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed just the different facets that go within a building itself. I mean, you have this, like I said, a closed off location. You can go up and down and you can kind of go side to side a little bit, but mostly you have just limited capacity of where you can travel. And so it amps up the tension. Now, I was really digging the soundtrack in this also. I mean, the music would become upbeat or driving as the scenes dictated, and it worked really well. But later on, they begin to use the exact same song over and over again. Now, I can dig Imagine Dragons songs, and the song that they chose worked really well in this scene, but then they used that song again and again. The repeated use of the song just became annoying, and it became more of a distraction, again, like some of the bad CGI. This show is based off a webtoon, and while I haven't seen that, I have seen some of the screenshots from it, and this series does a pretty good job at recreating some of the elements and some of the creatures and atmospheres within that. I wish the tension and urgency would have been more consistent throughout the entire narrative. From what we understand, there are creatures outside of this apartment building who are trying to get in. And there are parts where this causes some good fun with chases and anxiety, but then there's also parts, and large parts even at that, where the creatures are almost forgotten. So what that does is it reduces the danger of anything trying to get in. It just kind of breaks that and it forgets about them. There's even a part where a breach happens and nobody seems concerned by this. And that doesn't match the feel that had happened in other times when there was a breach or just even an opening. And that inconsistency began to weigh on me. And I don't need this to be a nonstop action show either. But because of how the story is crafted, there shouldn't be a letdown of the suspense. But that's not what happened in this. There was a letdown of the suspense. Because of that story inconsistency, I didn't feel this tension, this underlying urgency to protect oneself the entire way through. Now, I liked a lot of the cast. I mean, at least the way they were portrayed. I didn't like all of the characters, and some of them I absolutely hated, but I became invested in them. And there were some that I was really concerned for their safety and for their well-being, and I was rooting for them. And I'm really glad that they were able to put in some very emotional moments in this. I mean, I appreciate that, especially because, like I had said, some of the best parts about some South Korean shows and movies that I've watched is that they're able to infuse this emotionality to it, this pull that will just punch you in the gut or rip out your heartstrings because they've been able to get you to care about the characters so much so that when something happens, good or bad, you have a real emotional response to them. There are several questions that are left unanswered when the season concludes, and I don't get the sense that they are ever going to go back to answer them. And some of these involve elements within the apartment building. Through dialogue and visuals, we're led to believe that these are important, that there's some just importance to the story that these have, but when the season concludes, they're forgotten about, never to be mentioned. And even the end of the season doesn't fit too well with what we have been shown prior. I mean, maybe they're doing it just out of convenience, but it makes it feel choppy. So I had fun with this, but the inconsistencies did weigh on me. This first season is 10 episodes, and each of them are about an hour long. So this is a time commitment when you sit down to binge. Honestly, I think it could have been trimmed, not lose the emotionality of it, but by cutting it down some, it would have upped the urgency. It would have upped that suspense and tension and made it more impactful. Probably would have increased the thrills a lot also. There's no sex, brief nudity, some profanity, and a ton of bloody and gory violence. I give Sweet Home 3.5 out of 5 couches. Do you have a favorite South Korean thriller? I have a few that I'm really drawn to. I mean, 2 of them really are Train to Busan and The Host. But I'd love to know what yours are in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. I also apologize for that song at the beginning. That was just horrible, and I'm sorry to have done that to your ears.